keep forgetting to mention this, because I assume most people know, but while the hosts of this channel are British by birth and American by marriage and naturalization, this channel is actually based in the US. We're based in the Pacific Northwest, if you're interested, with our main studio just outside of Portland, Oregon, and our satellite studio, aka Kate Walton Elliott's house, somewhere in the Puget Sound. And I'm telling you this because we got a lot of comments from people angrily asking us why we keep test driving all these expensive EVs and all the big American EVs, and surely if we cared more about the planet and reducing emissions, we'd all be driving Euroboxes. And yes, I know, I just purchased a massive $80,000 electric pickup truck, which many of you are really not so happy about. But the reason we drive the cars we drive, both in terms of vehicles we review and vehicles we personally own, isn't because we're somehow anti-affordable EVs or anti-efficient vehicles. It's because of a market that in the US is basically being held ransom by one thing: bureaucracy. Namely, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, which in this case relies on the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988, or to put it more bluntly, red tape. And today, we're going to have a little rant about how changing these things would really dramatically change the number of EVs on sale today in the US, help decarbonise countries more rapidly, and bring customer choice to the forefront. But first, my loneliness is killing me, and I must confess, I still believe that you'll hit the bell and subscribe. Give me a sign, like me baby one more time. Thanks to Timo Berlin for that particular song re-lyric. And by the way, if you'd like to suggest one, you can now do it in Discord. We're going to set up a special channel for it. Reduce, reuse, and make a classic song about supporting this channel. Yeah, okay, on to the video. There are all kinds of amazing vehicles around the world that I and the rest of the team, and I think about one half of all US residents watching this, would like to import to the US. The Honda E comes to mind, as do a dozen or so other vehicles, because here in the US, the choices available to us are pretty small when it comes to electric hatchbacks and electric vans. And frankly, you can forget about small city cars with decent ranges. I purchased the behemoth, the F150 Lightning that is now known as a Deer Tal, not because I had some secret lusting after a full-sized pickup, something frankly Morris Minor-sized would have been far more up my alley, but because it and the Rivian R1T are currently about the only vehicles on offer that can carry 5 people and a decent amount of luggage, which, when you run a YouTube channel, you have a lot of. Sure, there is an electric van from Ford in the form of the E-Transit, but it has a battery pack that, when fully laden, has a range of less than 3 digits. Not great. Meanwhile, in Europe, there are a decent number of competent electric vans that would quite easily have met our needs for crew transportation, ranging from the Opel or Vauxhall Vivaro E, all the way through to the Renault Master E-Tech Electric, the Mercedes-Benz E-Sprinter, and the Mercedes-Benz EQV, and about a half dozen or so other models. Similarly, if you're in the market for an electric car in Europe, it's not just electric SUVs and high-end sedans. There are actual, factual electric hatchbacks on sale, like the Opel e-Corsa and Peugeot e-208, 2 cars that essentially have the same underneath their different body panels. There's the Renault Megane E-Tech and, of course, the Volkswagen ID.3 and E-Up. And that's before you even talk about wagons like the MG5 Estate. Which reminds me, let's talk about pricing and how prices in Europe are more affordable than they are in the US. The aforementioned MG5 Estate costs just under 28,000 UK pounds. And for those clever folk who say that converts right now to 34,000 US dollars and change, I should remind you that that price is with a 20% sales tax included. So if you look at the pre-tax price, it's closer to £25,000 or about 30,000 US dollars. The most affordable EV in the US right now is the 2022 Chevrolet Bolt EV, a car that is on sale from just under $26,600 US. But for that money, you get far less car than you do with the MG5. The latter is a full wagon, while the former is very awesome, but not hugely cavernous or tall. But it is a hatchback. What's more, the European market has many, many EVs for sale at the kind of price point that I'm talking about, including the Smart for 2 EQ, a vehicle which would still make a great runabout for many people, despite Smart pulling out of the US not so long ago. And don't even get me started on EVs from Asia, where a number of EVs currently on offer would have a pretty positive impact on the market in the US, reducing the entry-level price point for ownership and/or increasing customer choice. So, if you'll forgive me for saying so, a country that is so keen to promote free market capitalism and consumer choice is anything but. As I hinted at the top of this video, the real reason that many cars sold elsewhere in the world aren't imported to the US is because of red tape. Specifically, the Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act of 1988. Well, many people will tell you that this act was set in motion to protect American consumers from shoddily made vehicles from overseas. The reality is that it's designed to protect the interest of automakers who want to make and sell vehicles in the US. Its history is kind of an interesting one, and came to be after folks realised in the 1980s that they could import European spec versions of cars to the US and sell them for less than US spec versions of the same vehicle. The imports often had better power or engine options, more luxury features, and were considered more desirable. And as a consequence, automakers lost money. And just like the other bane to modern EVs today, auto dealer unions and franchise laws, Congress got involved to protect the interest of automakers, not regular American consumers. The law, passed in 1988, there's a surprise, it's in the title, was timed to coincide with new, stricter federal motor vehicle safety standards. Essentially, if a car didn't meet the letters of the regulations as set out in the FMVSS, which was and is still gate-kept by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, it wasn't allowed to be sold in the US. Guess what? The auto industry did have at least some say in helping NHTSA set those regulations, and the crash tests that also came along to play as well. And because at the time regulations on seatbelts weren't quite as stringent in the US as they were in Europe, and they still aren't, FMVSS standards for airbags or supplemental restraint systems were, and still are, different to those for European cars. In fact, side note, not so long ago, BMW had to recall the i3 in the US because it failed one particular test for airbag deployment for a particular size and weight of female crash test dummy. But the test it failed for wasn't for someone wearing a seatbelt. No, it was for someone not wearing a seatbelt. Because in some parts of the US, seatbelts are still optional. Don't ask. Because of these quirks and curiosities in state-by-state requirements, things that most countries have already harmonised, US safety standards are different enough to cause problems for any automaker seeking to bring a car originally designed for a non-US market to the US. And then there are the wondrous things like lights and warning bells. Because America is a famously litigious country, and so your average car in the US has far more warning bells, chimes and bongs than cars sold outside the US. And no, not that type of bong. If you live in the US, you probably haven't encountered this, but Europeans experiencing US cars for the first time are often quite disturbed by the number of chimes and warnings that occur between you opening the door, getting behind the seat, and finally driving off. And please don't even get me started on the ridiculousness of the stoplight and turn signal debacle. In the US, indicator lights can be red or they can be amber, something which can lead to confusion and which does impact safety, and which the lovely Alec of Technology Connections made an excellent video on, so I'm going to stop there and say you should go watch it. As a case in point, and to wrap this up with a nice tight bow, I should of course note that federal motor vehicle safety standards existed long before 1988. In fact, it was federal motor vehicle law that required my all-time favourite car, the Morris Minor, to undergo a bit of a facelift in order to meet with US car lighting regulations. Something, in fact, that made a different Alec, in this case Isagonis, the car's designer, very, very upset. The real frustration, though, comes from the fact that, unlike most markets around the world, where you can, as an individual, import a vehicle from overseas as long as it meets a more perfunctory set of basic safety requirements covering things like lights, indicators, brakes, and safety features, US import law requires that any vehicle under 25 years of age must meet exactly the same model year safety standards as any car manufactured and sold for the US market that came from the same year. And in order for a car that is non-compliant to be admitted into the US before its 25th birthday and stay there permanently, a registered importer of vehicles must put said make and model of car through an exhausted crash test regime, must modify all lights to US safety standards, and spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars doing so. Oh, and in order to meet those requirements, several dozen cars identical to the make and model seeking import must make the ultimate sacrifice, if you get my drift. Although there are exemptions, like a temporary import of less than a year, or if you happen to be a diplomat or similar governmental employee from a foreign nation on placement in the US, you can get exemptions. You can also get exemptions as a car collector if the vehicle is so very special that its existence is paramount to your collection. But then you're not actually allowed to drive the car very much, so it's kind of a moot point. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Many countries around the world have perfectly good crash test standards. And they do. In many ways, Euro NCAP and ANCAP tests are more thorough than the crash tests found in the US. If crash tests from other nations are just as good or better than those in the US, why can't the US agree that passing crash tests in, say, Europe or Australia is good enough for a US market import? You've guessed it, politics. Politics, politics, politics. I wish I could give you a very cerebral answer as to why automakers from outside the US aren't allowed to have their cars imported to the US, but it does come down to the incredibly large amount of money that has to be spent in order to pass those safety standards or to classify it as a non-compliant vehicle. And for automakers from outside the US, and sometimes even ones that sell in the US, but not the model you actually want to buy, the cost of doing all of the above is just too much for a vehicle that the car company is not 100% sure will sell in large volumes. And this is all before you consider the costs associated with offering after sales and service, which often, again, is a legal requirement. Offer none, and you will probably fall foul of the law. Offer not enough, and nobody will buy your vehicle because they can't get it fixed. And if you try to offer a high level of after-sales service that's comparable with a car made and sold in the US, well, again, it'll cost you a lot of money. Is there actually a way around this, though? Maybe. If enough people were to club together to commit to buying a particular car from a particular automaker and then were able to convince an official importer that they had the money required to make said vehicle go through all the loopholes that importing law requires for vehicles under 25, well, then maybe your big group of potential buyers could get some Renault Zoes or Honda E's imported. But very few cars have such a following, such an interest, that enough people would actually club together to make it a viable financial reality. The more sensible and affordable way, though, is to push politicians to make exemptions for EV imports from overseas that weren't originally designed for the US market. So if you want that rare forbidden fruit EV, well, guess what? You need to get politically active and make sure you tell your local Congress critters that not allowing these great, smaller, efficient, more affordable EVs to the US is making EVs less accessible while simultaneously reducing consumer choice. And that's a bad thing in the land of the free. That's all about consumer choice. That's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to leave your thoughts below or in our free to join Discord chat room. There are links in the video description. And if you really liked today's video, why not leave us a super thanks? It's easy to do so, and everything you do send our way goes towards helping us make great content. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel and our other channel, Transport Evolved Take 2, and give that bell a gentle ding to be told when our next video goes live. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons. That's Chris Maxwell, Pedro Mior Pinheiro, Patrick Boyarski, Bernard Elder, Brian Newton, Dave Kitchen, Michael Goad, Ricky Leon, Andrew Martin, Greedy Jahota, Brophy Wolf, Tesla in the Gong, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Carl Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Jim Burness, Chris Ascenta, Chris and Michael Johnson, Peter Dillinger and Denny Hyde, and our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month supporters, Anonymous Freak, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, Rory Litwin, Joe Bresney, Reed R, JP Fagerback, Russ, Will Graylin, Matthew Drobnak, John Lyons, Andrew Glenn, Paul Conway, Laura Reynolds, Ellery Hensley, and Ian. If you'd like to be part of that amazing list, you can join Patreon at the link below, hit the join button to support us on YouTube, or show us your support through Bitcoin, Ko-fi, or our cool swag store. And if you're unable to support us financially, just know that watching and interacting with the video, and of course sharing it, really makes a difference. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!